In the silence of deep space, a forgotten outpost hides a secret no scientist could ever explain. Behind steel walls, a silver-scaled hatchling paces, its eyes glowing like starlight, and its anger shaking the station itself. But when warships arrive, demanding his return, the fate of worlds hangs on one impossible question. Will the dragon choose his own kind, or the little human girl who dared to care for him? If you are new to the channel, then please subscribe to the channel and like the video, and tell us in the comments where you are watching from. Now, let's jump into the story. The warning sirens echoed through the halls of Station Aurora 9, but Commander Lillian Cross barely flinched. After 15 long years running this quiet outpost near the Veil Nebula, she had learned to ignore the minor alarms that cried out almost daily. Broken filters, tired machinery, and endless maintenance had become the background music of her life. She paid attention only when disaster truly loomed. But tonight, what caught her attention was not the sound of the siren. It was the scratching and low growls seeping from behind the thick walls of the quarantine bay. Lillian placed her datapad aside and called out, her tone flat with routine. "Computer, the port on Specimen 101. The calm voice of the system answered at once. Specimen remains stable, vital signs improving by 16% since yesterday. Note, the specimen has destroyed 2 feeding units and 1 camera in the last 5 hours. Lillian sighed and pushed her cold cup of synthetic coffee away. "Of course he has," she muttered. "What lived inside that bay should not have existed at all." According to every scientific record, dragons belonged to myths, to children's tales whispered back on Earth. Yet there he was, alive, breathing, and very real. He was no larger than a house cat, his silver scales glimmering faintly under artificial light. His eyes, sharp as blades, carried a fury that seemed older than the stars. She had discovered him 3 weeks earlier during a routine patrol in the asteroid field. Drifting alone, he had been trapped in what looked like a broken crystal pod. Her scanners had screamed with impossible readings, energy waves that defied reason, biological signals that no database could classify. When she opened the fractured pod, she had expected nothing more than debris. Instead, she found a tiny creature, trembling, his silver eyes reflecting fear and fire. In that moment, something unspoken had shifted in her chest. "You're going to be trouble," she had whispered, lifting him gently into her arms. Trouble had been an understatement. Since arriving, the hatchling, whom she secretly called Argent despite official orders to use specimen numbers only, had fought every attempt to understand him. Dr. Roland Veer, from the medical wing, had tried to examine him once, and only once. Now the doctor carried a scar across his hand and avoided the bay entirely. "That thing is not natural," Roland had declared. "It looked at me like it was calculating the fastest way to take me apart." Lillian had defended the creature, though she wasn't sure why. "He's scared," she had said. But deep down, she wondered if fear was the right word. Argent seemed less frightened and more offended by the very existence of others, and yet, for reasons she could not explain, he tolerated her. He allowed her into the bay without lashing out. He would eat when she brought his food, though he always knocked the dish aside afterward, maintaining steady eye contact as if to say, "I obey no one." Lillian often found herself speaking to him despite knowing he could not answer. "The council keeps asking what you are," she told him one evening. "They want a full report." Admiral Kestrel sent a message himself. She gave a half-smile. He sounded quite official, quite demanding. Argent, perched on the highest platform in his enclosure, tilted his head. his wings folded neatly against his sides, his tail wrapped tightly around him. He did not growl. He only stared, those star-bright eyes reflecting the light with a strange intelligence. When he moved, he did so with deliberate grace, climbing down as if each step were a favor granted. His scales shimmered with faint patterns, like maps of unknown constellations. Lillian could not deny the truth. He was beautiful, but in the dangerous way that storms are beautiful. One quiet cycle, she placed fresh nutrient paste in his chamber. It had been engineered at great cost, a blend of proteins and minerals from across 12 different worlds. Argent sniffed it, then knocked the container aside. She shook her head. "You're impossible," she said. He flicked his tail, and for a heartbeat, she thought she saw amusement in his expression. The routine of life on the station pressed on. Most of the crew were asleep or buried in endless repair work. Silence hung heavy in the corridors. Lillian stood at the threshold of the bay, watching Argent retreat back to his perch. She wondered if he would ever accept this place or anyone in it. Her wrist communicator buzzed suddenly, pulling her from her thoughts. "Commander," came the voice of her lieutenant. "Incoming vessel on approach. Diplomatic clearance from the Lyra colonies. They're requesting docking permission." Lillian frowned. A diplomatic ship, here, in the middle of nowhere, was unusual. "I'll be right there," she answered. Before she left, she glanced once more at Argent. The dragon watched her in silence, his silver eyes unblinking. "Try not to destroy the station while I'm gone," she said, her voice dry. Argent gave no answer, but as the heavy doors closed, a low sound echoed in the chamber. It was not a growl. It was not anger. It was something softer, a note that lingered like a secret waiting to be uncovered. What Lillian did not yet know was that the arrival of this ship and one quiet child hidden within it would change everything. The diplomatic vessel arrived with more ceremony than Station Aurora 9 had seen in years. Its polished surface gleamed as though it had been designed to impress rather than endure the harshness of space. Commander Lillian Cross stood in the docking bay, waiting with her usual patience. She had read the manifest and already knew who was stepping aboard. Envoy Darren Holt, his wife Celeste, and their daughter Marin. The airlock doors hissed open. Darren Holt stepped out first, tall and proud, his expression carrying the weight of politics. Beside him was Celeste, her posture stiff, her eyes scanning the outpost with quiet disapproval. But it was the small figure trailing behind them that caught Lillian's attention. Marin Holt could not have been older than 8. Her dark hair was tied back neatly, and her uniform-like dress suggested her mother's strict hand. She walked close to Celeste, her shoulders hunched, her gaze fixed on the floor, as if she hoped to disappear into the shadows. Envoy Holt greeted Lillian with the booming tone of practiced diplomacy. "Commander Cross, thank you for hosting us on such short notice." "Of course, Envoy," Lillian replied evenly. "Quarters have been prepared in Section B." As the formalities unfolded, Marin finally lifted her eyes. For the briefest moment, her gaze darted to the observation window above the bay. Beyond the glass stretched the Vale Nebu, glowing in hues of blue and violet scattered with starlight. Her lips parted slightly, in awe, before Celeste's hand pressed gently but firmly against her shoulder, guiding her forward. The family moved on, but Lillian noticed the way Marin glanced back, one last time at the stars, before vanishing down the corridor. Days passed in a careful rhythm. Darren spent his time with endless reports, sending messages to the council and issuing complaints about the station's outdated systems. Celeste criticized everything from the recycled air to the taste of the water. And Marin, quiet and unseen, followed instructions without protest. She attended her studies, spoke only when required, and carried herself with the silence of someone who had learned not to take up space. But Lillian watched. She noticed how Marin lingered by windows, how her eyes brightened when the stars were mentioned, and how her shoulders relaxed when no one else was watching. One late cycle, Lillian entered the quarantine bay with a new container of nutrient paste for Argent. The hatchling sat perched high above, his silver scales catching the dim light. As usual, he refused to come down until he decided it was on his terms. Lillian set the container on the platform below and muttered, "You'll probably knock it over again, won't you?" She turned at the sound of soft footsteps. Her breath caught. Standing in the doorway, wide-eyed and motionless, was Marin. "How did you get in here?" Lillian asked sharply. The door should have been locked with multiple layers of clearance. Marin's eyes, however, were not on the commander. They were fixed on Argent. "Is that a dragon?" she whispered, her voice filled with awe rather than fear. Argent shifted. Instead of growling or retreating, he climbed down from his perch, his movements slow and deliberate. His silver eyes glowed with curiosity. For the first time since arriving at the outpost, he looked at someone without hostility. "Marin, you shouldn't be here," Lillian began, taking a step forward. "It's dangerous." But Argent's behavior froze her in place. The hatchling descended fully to the floor, tilting his head, studying the child with quiet intensity. Marin stepped closer, ignoring the commander's warning. Her small hand lifted, trembling but determined. "He's beautiful," she said softly. Argent gave a sound that startled Lillian. It was not a growl, not a hiss, but a low musical chirp. He took a step toward Marin, then another. "His name is Argent," Lillian admitted, though officially he was still Specimen 101. "Argent," Marin repeated gently, as though the word itself was precious. In that moment, Argent pressed his snout carefully against Marin's palm. Lillian held her breath, expecting claws or teeth, but none came. Instead, Argent's scales shimmered faintly under the child's touch, glowing with a light she had never seen before. From that day forward, everything changed. Marin began slipping into the quarantine bay often, always managing to bypass the security systems. Lillian could not prove it, but she suspected Argent himself had something to do with it. The hatchling no longer snarled or destroyed every object in sight when Marin was near. Instead, he followed her movements, sometimes curling at her side like a scaly shadow, sometimes playfully nudging her with his nose. Marin's voice, once barely audible, grew louder around him. She asked questions about his scales, his strange patterns, and why he always knocked things over after eating. She laughed when he pretended to hide her hair ribbons, only to reveal them moments later with mischievous pride. For the first time, Lillian saw Marin come alive. Her quiet nature melted into curiosity, her silence broken by laughter. Argent responded with equal transformation. His health improved rapidly, his scales shining brighter, his once constant hostility fading whenever Marin entered the bay. Lillian knew this bond was dangerous. The council had demanded strict containment, and her reports already skirted the truth. But watching the two together, she could not bring herself to end it. Still, unease grew. Weeks passed, and the sensors began detecting unusual energy signatures beyond the station's borders. Crystalline ships appeared in the distance, unlike any recorded in the archives. Their presence was silent but heavy with purpose. When Lillian looked at the screen and then back at Argent, she realized the truth she had feared since the beginning. They had come for him. The station alarm screamed, but this time they were not routine. Commander Lillian Cross raced through the narrow corridors of Aurora 9, her boots pounding against the steel floors. In the command deck, Screens blazed with warnings. 3 vast ships hovered just outside the perimeter, their surfaces crystalline and radiant, shimmering as though they had been carved from starlight itself. Lieutenant Joran Maeve spoke quickly, his face pale. "Commander, they sent a transmission, not in words, but in patterns. We understood it somehow. They want Specimen 101. They want Argent returned, and if we refuse, they will fire." Lillian's throat tightened. She had known this moment would come. The strange pod in which she had found Argent, the impossible readings. The way his scales seemed to hold maps of unfamiliar skies. None of it had been an accident. Someone had made him. Someone had lost him. And now they were here to reclaim him. The first blast rattled the station, metal groaning under the pressure. Shields dropped to 60%. "Commander, we can't withstand another strike like that," Joran said, panic rising in his voice. Lillian did not hesitate. "Keep the shields up as long as possible. I'll be in the quarantine bay." She sprinted through the station. When she burst into... she found Marin pressed against the wall, eyes wide with fear. Argent was pacing in frantic circles, his silver scales flickering with bursts of light that lit the walls. "They're here for him, aren't they?" Marin asked, her voice shaking. Lillian nodded. "Yes, but it's not that simple." Argent stopped pacing, his eyes locking onto hers, then shifting to the child. In that gaze, she saw conflict. He could feel the call of his own kind. He knew he belonged to them. Yet his body trembled as though the very idea of leaving Marin tore at him. Another blast struck. The deck beneath them shook violently. "Commander?" Joran's voice came over the comm. "Shields down to 30%. We won't last much longer." Marin clutched Argent tightly, tears running down her cheeks. "You can't let them take him. He doesn't want to go." Lillian's mind raced. Communication. The transmissions from the ships had not been words, but sound and rhythm, almost like music. And Argent had always knocked things over, made patterns, produced strange notes no one fully understood. She turned to Marin. "Remember when you said Argent was trying to tell us something? What if that's true? What if he can speak to them?" Marin looked at Argent, desperate. "Argent, please, you have to try." Lillian hurried to the control panel and opened a wideband channel. "Argent, if you can send them a message, do it now. Tell them anything." The hatchling lifted his head. Light rippled across his body, brighter than ever before. Then the sound came, a deep, harmonic tone that resonated in the walls, in their bones, in their very minds. It was more than sound. It was music and mathematics, feeling and thought woven together. Outside, the enemy ships stopped firing. Silence fell. Argent continued his song, his voice growing steadier, more confident. In response, the crystalline ships emitted their own tones, layered and complex. Like an ancient choir answering high, the exchange built into a dialogue that bypassed language altogether. It spoke directly to the soul. Marin held her breath as the meaning became clear even without words. Argent was telling them about his time here, about how he had been alone, frightened and angry, until a small human girl showed him kindness. He was explaining that he had found something new, not just survival, but choice. The reply came, slow and resonant. They were preservers, guardians of endangered species. Argent had been collected as an egg, meant to awaken in safety. But his pod had been damaged, leaving him adrift. He was never meant to wake up alone. The ships projected a vision into the bay, a sanctuary world of floating peaks, rivers of silver, and dragons soaring together. His true home. Marin's tears fell faster. She pressed her face into Argent's neck. "If you want to go, I'll understand," she whispered. "You deserve to be with your own kind." Argent lowered his head. Pressing his snout against her chest, he trembled, caught between the two worlds calling him. The vision of his people shimmered before him, so close he could almost fly into it. But then he turned his gaze back to Marin. Slowly, deliberately, Argent raised one claw and struck the glowing sphere that projected the vision. It toppled onto the floor with a sharp crack, fading into nothingness. Lillian gasped. Marin blinked, hardly believing what she saw. "He chose," she whispered. "He chose to stay." The ships outside responded with a resonance that felt like acceptance tinged with resignation. Their tones softened, shifting into something almost amused. They would not take him by force. Instead, they offered a different gift. Streams of data filled the station's systems. Knowledge of Argent's species, their history, their songs. Lillian stood frozen, her chest heavy with relief. The station was still damaged, the crew shaken. But something remarkable had happened. Argent had been given a choice between kindred and connection, and he had chosen the bond that mattered most, the bond with the girl who had seen him not as a weapon, not as a monster, but as a friend. As the crystalline fleet withdrew into the dark, the quarantine bay fell quiet. Argent curled protectively around Marin, humming a soft tone that carried more warmth than words ever could. For Commander Lillian Cross, it was a moment she knew would change not only the station, but perhaps the future of every human who looked to the stars. The next morning, Station Aurora 9 felt different. The crew moved through the halls with quiet disbelief, whispering about the night the crystalline fleet had come and left without destruction. The scars of battle were still visible in the fractured walls and flickering lights, but the mood had shifted. They had survived because of Argent, and because of a child. Commander Lillian Cross stood in the command deck, staring at the logs left behind by the alien ships. Lines of data filled the screen, shimmering with strange codes and ancient knowledge. It was more than information. It was an invitation. In the quarantine bay, Marin knelt beside Argent, her hands buried in the silver scales along his neck. The hatchling was calmer now, no longer pacing in anger or fear. His eyes glowed softly, reflecting the girl's face. She whispered to him as if no one else existed. "You stayed for me. I'll never forget that." Argent answered with a low chirp, curling around her protectively. When Envoy Darren Holt and his wife Celeste stormed in, their expressions were a mix of outrage and confusion. "This is unacceptable," Darren thundered. "A creature of unknown power threatening the galaxy, and you let my daughter play with it like a pet?" Before Lillian could respond, Marin stood, her hands still on Argent's head. Her voice, steady and clear, silenced the room. "He's not a pet. He's my friend. And he just saved all of us." Darren's mouth opened in shock. Celeste's cold composure cracked as she stared at her daughter's defiance. For years, Marin had been silent, obedient, unseen. Now, standing beside the dragon, she looked unshakable. Lillian spoke firmly. "According to galactic law, any being capable of advanced communication and negotiation is recognized as sentient. Argent just held dialogue with his own kind and prevented a war. That makes him an ambassador. And by extension, your daughter is the one who helped him find his voice." Argent stretched his wings, not large yet, but wide enough to make both parents step back. His silver scales caught the light, forming patterns like star maps across the walls. From that day forward, everything changed. The Galactic Council soon sent envoys and scientists, eager to study Argent, but he made his preferences clear. He only allowed scans and examinations when Marin was present. Without her, he refused to cooperate, often knocking over equipment to drive the point home. "He's protecting her," Dr. Veer observed one afternoon, watching from behind the safety glass. "But I think she's protecting him too." The bond between them deepened. Marin bloomed into someone unrecognizable from the quiet shadow who had arrived with her parents. She laughed openly, asked endless questions, and often spoke with Argent as though he were the only one who truly listened. And in many ways, he was. Argent grew as well. No longer the fragile creature from the broken pod, he grew stronger each day, his body stretching, his wings gaining power. Though still young, he carried himself with the dignity of something far older. Months later, the crystalline ships returned, not with threats, but with respect. Their leaders sent a direct invitation. They wished to meet the child who had taught one of their own the meaning of choice. The council debated. Darren and Celeste argued, but Marin's voice rose above them all. "I'll go only if Argent chooses to, and Commander Lillian must come with us. She saved him first." So the three of them traveled together to the Sanctuary of the Dragons. The world was breathtaking. Crystalline towers floated in skies of silver mist. Seas shimmered with liquid light. Hundreds of dragons filled the air, each unique, their scales glowing like living constellations. Argent was welcomed not as a lost hatchling, but as a bridge. Yet the most extraordinary moment came when the elder dragons surrounded Marin. Their voices, layered in musical tones, filled the air with what could only be described as joy. The translators hummed, interpreting, "The child has shown us that preservation is not the only path. To change, to grow, to choose, this is how life thrives." Argent stood beside her, proud and protective. For the first time, he was not just tolerated, not just accepted, he was celebrated. An elder dragon offered a choice. "You may remain here, among us, forever. This sanctuary will always be yours." Marin looked at Argent, and he looked back. After a long silence, she smiled. "Thank you, but we have family waiting, and Argent has work to do." Argent, puffing with pride, flicked his tail and knocked over a ceremonial crystal. The elder dragons responded with laughter that shook the sky. When they returned to Aurora 9, the station was no longer a forgotten outpost. It had become a hub of interspecies diplomacy. Leaders, scientists, and explorers from across the galaxy traveled to meet the dragon ambassador and the girl who had taught him compassion. Argent pretended to hate the attention. He glared at cameras, knocked over tools, and often retreated to the observation deck. But whenever Marin introduced him, he allowed himself to be admired, his scales glowing like the heart of the nebula. Years passed. Marin grew from a shy child into a confident young diplomat. Argent grew larger, strong enough to fly within the station's hangars. Together, they became symbols of unity, their story spreading across star systems. And still, some things never changed. One evening, Lillian entered the observation deck to find Argent sprawled on the floor, his enormous head resting in Marin's lap. She was reading aloud from her datapad, her voice soft and steady. Argent purred with a sound like distant thunder. When she finished, she looked up and asked softly, "Do you think he misses them? His kind?" Lillian paused, watching the dragon's glowing eyes. Maybe. But he knows where they are. And he knows he has a choice. He found something here he never expected. What's that? Marin asked. A family, Lillian said. Argent lifted his head, glanced at them both, and with deliberate mischief, knocked over a stack of reports resting on the table. Marin laughed, and the sound carried through the station. In that moment, with dragon and human together, laughter echoing into the stars, it was clear their bond would endure. A girl's voice and a dragon's choice had rewritten the future and reminded everyone that family is not only born, but chosen.